I ate alone in my car after graduation while families hugged and posed for pictures inside the gym. My parents never came. No calls, no photos, not even an excuse. But just as I bit into my burger, someone knocked on my window, and everything changed after that. The woman standing outside my old Honda was maybe 40, dressed in clothes that screamed money, the kind of understated elegance you can't fake with a credit card at the mall. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her eyes were this piercing blue that seemed to look straight through the windshield and into every broken piece of me. I rolled down the window halfway, confused and a little creeped out because who approaches a crying girl in a parking lot? Diana Jacob? Her voice was smooth, controlled, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. I nodded, wiping burger grease off my chin with a napkin that already had mascara stains on it. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach those calculating eyes. "My name is Victoria Ashford. I knew your mother a long time ago. We need to talk." That's how it started. Sitting in the passenger seat of her black Mercedes SUV that smelled like leather and expensive perfume, listening to her tell me that my mother, the woman who couldn't be bothered to show up for my high school graduation, had apparently been her best friend back in college. Victoria explained that she'd been tracking my family for years, watching from a distance, and what she'd discovered had compelled her to intervene today of all days. She told me my parents weren't struggling financially like they'd always claimed. They were living comfortably in a suburb 2 hours away with my half-brother, a kid I didn't even know existed until that moment. The abandonment wasn't about money or hardship. It was about choice. They'd chosen him over me, rebuilt their lives without the daughter who reminded them of mistakes they wanted to forget, and Victoria had the bank statements, the social media screenshots, and the private investigator reports to prove it. I should have been devastated. I should have broken down right there in her luxury vehicle, but something else happened instead. Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest where the hurt used to live. Victoria watched me process it all with this knowing look, like she'd expected exactly this reaction. Then she made me an offer that sounded insane. Come live with her family in Houston, attend university there on her dime, become part of the Ashford world, and in exchange, I'd help her with what she called a delicate family matter. She didn't elaborate right then, just handed me a business card with an address in River Oaks, the kind of neighborhood I'd only seen in magazines, and told me to think about it. But we both knew I'd already decided. What did I have to lose? A family that forgot me? A future waiting tables in this nowhere town? I texted her that night. I'm in. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the circular driveway of a mansion that looked like it belonged on a movie set, staring up at columns and windows that probably cost more than most people's houses. Victoria greeted me at the door wearing white linen pants and a smile that was warmer than before, more practiced, like she'd switched into hostess mode. She introduced me to her husband, Christopher Ashford, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of handshake that wealthy men perfect, firm but not too aggressive, accompanied by eye contact that assessed your worth in seconds. He welcomed me politely, distantly, the way you might acknowledge a new piece of furniture. Then there was their daughter, Sienna, who was exactly my age and looked like she'd walked off an Instagram influencer's feed. Long, dark hair, perfect skin, designer athleisure that probably cost what I used to make in a month. She looked me up and down with thinly veiled hostility and said, "So you're the charity project Mom's been talking about," before walking away without waiting for a response. Victoria showed me to my room, and calling it a room felt like an insult to what it actually was. A suite, really, with a king-sized bed, a sitting area, a bathroom bigger than my old bedroom, and windows overlooking their pool and the manicured gardens beyond. She told me to get settled, that we'd talk specifics tomorrow, and left me alone with my 2 suitcases and the overwhelming sensation that I'd just walked into something way more complicated than a generous scholarship arrangement. That night I couldn't sleep, so I explored the house after everyone had gone to bed, creeping through hallways lined with art that was probably worth a fortune, peeking into rooms that seemed to serve no purpose except to exist. That's when I found Christopher's study. The door was cracked open, lights still on, and I heard voices. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I'd never been good at doing what I should, so I pressed myself against the wall and tuned in. Christopher's voice was angry, hushed but intense. "This is insane, Victoria. Bringing her here, into our home, do you have any idea what you're risking?" Victoria's response was ice cold and measured. "I know exactly what I'm risking, and I know exactly what I'm doing. Sienna needs to learn that actions have consequences, and Diana is going to help me teach her that lesson." There was a pause, then Christopher again, sounding tired. "This isn't about teaching anyone anything. This is about your need for control, for revenge against a 20-year-old girl who doesn't even know what she did wrong." Victoria laughed, this bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "She knows. Trust me, she knows. And by the time I'm done, everyone will know." I crept back to my room with my heart pounding, questions multiplying in my head like bacteria in a petri dish. What had Sienna done? Why did Victoria really bring me here? What was I actually part of? Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by anxiety and the strange sounds of a house I didn't know, and when morning arrived, I felt like I'd been awake for days. Breakfast was served in a dining room with a table that could seat 12, though only the 4 of us were there: me, Victoria, Christopher, and Sienna, who ignored me completely while scrolling through her phone. Victoria outlined the plan. I'd be enrolling at the University of Houston in the fall, studying business management, living here rent-free with all expenses covered. In exchange, I'd assist her with various projects: event planning, charity work, social coordination. It sounded legitimate on the surface, almost too generous, but I kept thinking about what I'd overheard, about the word revenge and the way she'd said it. The first few weeks were disorienting, like living in a magazine spread where everything looked perfect, but nothing felt real. Victoria kept me busy with tasks that seemed designed to integrate me into their social circle: attending gallery openings, charity luncheons, country club dinners where women with perfect faces and expensive jewelry asked me polite questions while mentally calculating my net worth. Sienna avoided me when possible and was coldly civil when necessary, treating me like staff rather than a guest. Christopher was rarely home, always at the office or traveling for business, and when he was around, he seemed more interested in his phone than any of us. But Victoria, she was always watching, always orchestrating, moving pieces around her chessboard with a patience that was somehow more frightening than outright aggression. About a month in, Victoria started asking me to do things that felt off. Small things at first. "Diana, would you mind sitting next to Sienna's boyfriend at dinner tonight? I want to see how he handles polite conversation with new people." Or, "I need you to accidentally mention to Sienna that you ran into her ex at the gym. Just casually, see how she reacts." I did what she asked because I owed her, because she'd saved me from a life of nothing, because I was curious about where this was heading. And every time I completed one of these small missions, Victoria would smile and say, "Good girl," like I was a pet who'd learned a new trick. Sienna's boyfriend was named Derek Chen, and he was everything you'd expect from a guy dating a River Oaks princess: rich family, law school bound, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He started paying attention to me after that dinner. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly conversation, asking about my background, my plans, acting interested in a way that felt genuine but probably wasn't. I caught Sienna watching us once, her expression unreadable, and I realized that Victoria was using me as some kind of test or threat, dangling me in front of Sienna's life to provoke a reaction. The thought should have bothered me more than it did, but honestly, after watching Sienna treat service staff like they were invisible and throw tantrums when her father wouldn't increase her already obscene allowance, I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. Then came the night that shifted everything into sharper focus. Victoria invited me into her private sitting room, a place I'd never been allowed before, and poured us both wine even though I was still underage. She told me to sit, and I did, sinking into a velvet armchair that probably cost more than a semester of college. She looked at me for a long moment, swirling her wine, and then she started talking. She told me that Sienna had been involved in something terrible the previous year, something that had destroyed another family, and that Christopher had used his money and connections to make it disappear. A girl named Rebecca Torres was Sienna's classmate, her competition for valedictorian, her rival in every way that mattered to entitled rich kids. Sienna had orchestrated an elaborate scheme, planted drugs in Rebecca's locker, manipulated evidence, gotten her expelled right before college applications were due. Rebecca's scholarship offers were rescinded, her reputation destroyed, and 6 months later, overwhelmed by depression and the impossibility of her situation, she'd taken her own life. I felt sick listening to it, my stomach churning with wine and disgust. Victoria's face was expressionless, but her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Rebecca's mother, Elena Torres, was my housekeeper for 10 years. She was my friend, and when her daughter died, Christopher paid her off, a significant sum to sign an NDA, to never speak about what Sienna did, to just disappear quietly. Victoria's eyes met mine, and they were filled with something dark and determined. Elena took the money because she had 2 younger children to feed, but she made me promise something before she left. She made me promise that Sienna would understand what she'd taken, that someday, somehow, there would be consequences. And I intend to keep that promise. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. I wasn't here as a charity case or a student. I was here as a weapon. A tool for Victoria's revenge against her own daughter. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Victoria smiled, and this time it was genuine, almost relieved. "I want you to become indispensable to this family. I want you to be everything Sienna isn't: grateful, hardworking, humble, kind. I want Christopher to see the daughter he could have had if he'd raised Sienna with values instead of credit cards. I want Sienna to watch you earn everything she's taken for granted. And when the time is right, I want you to help me expose what she did, to make sure Rebecca's story is told. Consequences be damned." I should have walked away right then. I should have packed my bags and left that house of beautiful lies and ugly truths. But I thought about my own parents, about being thrown away like garbage, about how people with money always seemed to escape the things that would destroy normal people. I thought about Rebecca Torres, a girl I'd never met, whose life had been stolen by someone who'd never spent a single day paying for it. And I thought about Victoria, a mother so disgusted by her own child that she'd bring a stranger into her home to execute revenge she couldn't enact herself. It was twisted, it was wrong, it was probably going to blow up in all our faces, but it was also the first time in my life anyone had trusted me with something important, had seen me as capable of more than just surviving. "I'll help you," I said, and Victoria reached across the space between us to squeeze my hand, her eyes shining with tears she didn't let fall. We sat there in silence for a while. 2 women bound by other people's cruelty, plotting justice or revenge or whatever you call it when the system has already failed and you're making up the rules yourself. The next morning, everything looked different. I watched Sienna at breakfast, this beautiful girl who'd killed someone through sheer entitlement and slept fine afterward, and I felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. I started playing my part with more intention, being extra helpful around the house, volunteering for every charity event Victoria suggested, striking up conversations with Christopher about business and ethics and responsibility. He started warming to me, making comments like, "I wish Sienna had half your work ethic," and "You're going to do great things, Diana." Each compliment was a small knife in Sienna's composure, and I could see her starting to crack, to view me not as beneath her notice, but as a genuine threat. Derek started texting me, just friendly stuff at first, memes, questions about class recommendations, invitations to group hangouts. I kept Victoria informed of everything, and she encouraged me to engage, to be friendly but never inappropriate, to be present in Sienna's relationship without actually doing anything wrong. It was psychological warfare, and I was getting disturbingly good at it. Sienna confronted me one afternoon by the pool, her voice sharp. "I don't know what your game is, but I see what you're doing. Sucking up to my parents, flirting with my boyfriend, you're pathetic." I looked at her calmly and said, "I'm not playing any game, Sienna. I'm just living my life. If that threatens you, maybe ask yourself why." She slapped me, just reached out and slapped me hard enough that my ears rang, and for a second, we both just stared at each other in shock. Then she turned and walked away, and I stood there with my cheek burning, knowing that Victoria had probably watched the whole thing from her bedroom window, knowing that this was exactly the kind of reaction she'd been hoping for. That night, Victoria came to my room with ice wrapped in a designer hand towel and an apology for her daughter's behavior that sounded sincere but felt rehearsed. "She's scared," Victoria said softly. "She's never had to compete for anything, and now she's watching someone earn what she's always just been given. It's terrifying for her." I wanted to ask if Victoria felt any maternal instinct to protect Sienna, any hesitation about what we were doing, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. Things escalated quickly after that. Sienna started making mistakes, forgetting important family commitments, skipping charity events, getting into arguments with Derek that ended with slammed doors and tears. Meanwhile, I was there, reliable and present, filling the gaps she left, becoming the daughter Victoria apparently wished she had. Christopher started asking me to attend business dinners with him when Victoria was busy, treating me like a mentee, talking about the family business like I might actually have a future in it. And every kindness from him, every inclusion, drove Sienna further into this spiral of jealousy and rage that was genuinely scary to witness. Then came the night of the annual River Oaks Charity Gala, the biggest social event of the season, where Houston's wealthiest gathered to throw money at causes they'd forget about by morning. Victoria had bought me a gown, midnight blue, elegant, expensive, and arranged for hair and makeup artists to come to the house. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked like I belonged in their world, like I'd been born to wear dresses that cost thousands of dollars. Sienna saw me before we left, and something ugly flickered across her face. "Playing dress-up doesn't make you one of us," she hissed. "You're still just the charity case my mother dragged in off the street." I smiled at her, and I made it sure it was kind, pitying even. "At least I earned my place here, Sienna. What have you ever earned?" The gala was everything I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, women dripping in jewelry that could have fed families for years. I stayed close to Victoria, playing my role perfectly, charming the donors and socialites she introduced me to. Christopher gave a speech about the importance of giving back, of remembering that privilege comes with responsibility, and I watched Sienna standing in the corner, downing champagne like water, her expression darker with every word her father spoke. Derek found me during dinner, asked me to dance during the live band portion of the evening, and I said yes, because Victoria nodded her approval from across the room. Dancing with Derek was easy. He was a good lead, and we made pleasant small talk about nothing important. But I could feel eyes on us, could sense the whispers starting, could see Sienna watching from the bar with a glass in her hand and murder in her eyes. When the song ended, Derek thanked me and went to find Sienna, probably to do damage control, and Victoria appeared at my elbow. "Perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Just a little longer now, and everything will be ready." "Ready for what, exactly?" I asked, because we were weeks into this operation and I still didn't know the endgame. Victoria's smile was secretive, almost excited. "You'll see. Soon. Very soon." That was all she'd say, and I spent the rest of the evening with anxiety crawling under my skin like insects, wondering what I'd actually agreed to, what monster I'd made a deal with in that parking lot 4 months ago. We got home around midnight, and Sienna immediately disappeared to her room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle frames on the walls. Christopher went to his study with a whiskey, and Victoria asked me to join her on the back terrace, overlooking the pool that was lit up like something from a dream. She poured us both wine and looked out at the water, her profile perfect and cold in the artificial light. "My daughter is a monster," she said quietly, and the bluntness of it shocked me. "I've known it for a long time, but I kept making excuses. She's young, she's spoiled, she'll grow out of it." But when Rebecca died, when I saw what Sienna had done and watched Christopher just throw money at it until it went away, I realized that I'd failed. Not just as a mother, but as a person. I'd created something cruel and set it loose in the world, and someone had died because of it. She turned to look at me, her eyes wet, but her voice steady. "In 2 weeks, there's going to be a memorial event for Rebecca Torres. Her mother, Elena, is organizing it through a nonprofit that helps families affected by educational injustice. I've been helping her plan it, funding it, and I've arranged for the media to be there, for Sienna's name to come up, for the whole story to finally be told. Christopher doesn't know, Sienna doesn't know, but when it happens, the NDA Elena signed will be void, because I'll admit I coerced her into signing it, I'll take full responsibility, and Sienna will finally face real consequences for what she did." I stared at her, trying to process the enormity of what she was describing. "You're going to destroy your own daughter publicly? You're going to blow up your family, your husband's business, everything?" Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm going to make sure a dead girl gets justice, and that the world knows who really killed her. If that destroys my family, then my family deserved to be destroyed. We've been rotting from the inside for years. This will just make the rot visible." She paused, then added, "And I need you there with me, Diana. I need someone who understands, someone who isn't tainted by years of complicity. I need a witness to stand with me when I do this." I didn't sleep that night either, just lay in my expensive bed in my borrowed room and tried to figure out if what we were doing was justice or just a different kind of cruelty. Because yeah, Sienna deserved consequences, but destroying her entire life publicly? Using me as some kind of prop in a mother's revenge against her own child? How was that different from what Sienna had done to Rebecca? How was orchestrating someone's downfall ever really about justice when it felt this much like satisfaction? But then I'd think about Rebecca Torres, about a girl who'd worked hard and played by the rules and still lost everything because someone with more money and fewer morals decided she was in the way. I'd think about my own parents, about all the people who'd hurt me and never even noticed, never faced anything resembling accountability. And I'd think that maybe perfect justice doesn't exist. Maybe sometimes you just have to settle for any justice at all, even if it's messy and complicated and leaves everyone bloody. The 2 weeks before the memorial event passed in a strange haze. Sienna seemed to sense something was coming. She got quieter, more paranoid, started accusing me and Victoria of plotting against her. Christopher dismissed her concerns as dramatic attention-seeking, which only made her more frantic. Derek broke up with her 3 days before the event, citing her increasingly erratic behavior. And Sienna showed up at my bedroom door that night, drunk and crying, asking me why I was doing this to her, what she'd ever done to me. I almost felt sorry for her in that moment, almost told her everything, but then I remembered that she'd never felt sorry for Rebecca, never lost a single night of sleep over destroying an innocent person. So I told her I didn't know what she was talking about and closed the door on her tears. The morning of the memorial, Victoria was calm in a way that felt unnatural, like she'd already made peace with whatever was about to happen. She'd arranged for us to attend together, told Christopher it was a charity event for educational equality that she'd been supporting. He was traveling for business anyway, wouldn't be there to see it unfold in real time. Sienna wasn't invited, wasn't told, would find out about it the same way everyone else would, through the news coverage that Victoria had meticulously arranged. We drove to the venue in silence, Victoria's hands steady on the wheel, my stomach in knots. The memorial was being held at a community center in a neighborhood that people like the Ashfords never visited, the kind of place where Rebecca Torres had actually lived, where real people dealt with real consequences. Elena Torres was there, a small woman with graying hair and eyes that held an ocean of grief. She hugged Victoria like they were sisters, thanked her over and over, then looked at me with curiosity. Victoria introduced me as someone who understood, who'd agreed to help, and Elena squeezed my hand with gratitude I wasn't sure I deserved. The event started with speeches about Rebecca, her teachers, her friends, her siblings, painting a picture of a girl who'd been brilliant and kind and full of potential. There were photos, and I watched this life that had been stolen, this future that would never happen, and I felt the weight of what we were about to do settle onto my shoulders like concrete. Then Elena stood up to speak, and her voice shook but didn't break as she told the truth, about the drugs planted in her daughter's locker, about the investigation that went nowhere because money made it disappear, about the name everyone had been too afraid to say until now, Sienna Ashford. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, and cameras started flashing because Victoria had made sure the press was here, had made sure this moment would be documented and spread beyond this room. Elena named Christopher Ashford too, described the money and the NDA and the way justice had been bought and buried. And then Victoria stood up, walked to the front of the room with her head high, and confirmed every word. She apologized to Elena publicly, admitted her own complicity in protecting Sienna for too long, and announced that she was divorcing Christopher and divesting from the family business because she could no longer be part of a system that valued wealth over human life. I sat there in shock, because this hadn't been part of the plan she'd told me, this public self-destruction. But watching her stand there and accept responsibility, watching her choose integrity over comfort, I realized that this was what actual courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to lose everything for what's right. Then Victoria did something I absolutely wasn't expecting. She called me up to the front. My legs felt like rubber as I stood, as I walked to where she was standing, as she put her hand on my shoulder and told the room about me, about how she'd found me alone after graduation, about my own family's abandonment, about how she'd brought me into her home initially for the wrong reasons, but how I'd taught her something important about resilience and integrity. She said I represented the kind of person Sienna could have been if she'd been raised with values instead of excuses, and that part of her penance would be establishing a scholarship in Rebecca's name that I would help administer, ensuring that girls like Rebecca, girls with talent but without money, would get the opportunities they deserved. The press ate it up, asking questions, taking photos, and I stood there feeling like a fraud because I hadn't done any of this for noble reasons. I'd done it because I was angry and hurt and wanted to be part of something that mattered, even if that something was revenge dressed up as justice. But Victoria squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Your motives don't matter as much as your actions, Diana. Remember that." We left the memorial to our phones blowing up with notifications. The story was everywhere. trending on social media, picked up by major news outlets. Christopher had already released a statement through his lawyers, denying everything, claiming his wife was having a breakdown, threatening legal action. Sienna had posted and deleted a dozen Instagram stories, each more frantic than the last, before apparently turning off her phone or throwing it against a wall. And me? I had messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who'd ignored me in high school, suddenly wanting to know my story, wanting to be associated with the girl who'd stood with Victoria Ashford against corruption and privilege. We went back to the house to find Sienna waiting, and she looked like she'd aged years in hours, makeup smeared, hair tangled, eyes wild. She screamed at Victoria, called her every name I'd ever heard and some I hadn't, asked how a mother could destroy her own daughter like this. Victoria just stood there and took it. And when Sienna finally ran out of words, Victoria said quietly, "I didn't destroy you, sweetheart. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. There's a difference." Sienna turned on me then, lunged at me actually, and I stepped back just as Christopher came through the door, home early because his entire world was imploding. He immediately went to Sienna, held her while she sobbed into his chest, and shot Victoria a look of pure hatred. "You've ruined us," he said, his voice cold. "You've ruined our family, our name, everything we've built." Victoria met his eyes steadily. "No, Christopher, you ruined us the day you decided our daughter's reputation was worth more than a dead girl's memory. I'm just making sure everyone knows it." I slipped away while they fought, went to my room and started packing, because I knew my time in this house was over. Victoria found me an hour later, looking exhausted but somehow lighter, like she'd been carrying something heavy for years and had finally set it down. She told me she'd bought me an apartment near campus, set up a trust fund for my education and living expenses, made sure I'd be taken care of even after everything fell apart. "This isn't charity," she said firmly. "You earned this. You stood with me when you didn't have to, and I will never forget that." I wanted to tell her that I'd done it for selfish reasons, that I wasn't the hero she was making me out to be, but before I could, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking, and a voice I hadn't heard in over a year spoke. "Diana? Bibi? It's Mom. We saw the news and we've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about some things. Explain why we—" I hung up without a word, blocked the number and looked at Victoria with something like understanding passing between us. "Funny how people only show up when you're worth something," I said bitterly. Victoria nodded. "The ones who matter stick around before you're valuable. Remember that, too." I moved out the next day with Victoria's help, leaving behind the mansion and the drama and the family tearing itself apart in slow motion. The story dominated news cycles for weeks. Christopher fighting back with lawyers and PR firms, Sienna forced into therapy and community service as part of a plea deal to avoid criminal charges, and Victoria becoming an unlikely hero to people who'd been victimized by wealthy privilege. The scholarship fund was established, with a board that included Elena Torres and 3 other parents who'd lost children to the cruelty of entitled classmates. And me? I started university, threw myself into studying business ethics and social justice, tried to figure out who I was beyond the girl who'd been used as a weapon in someone else's war. But Victoria's war wasn't over, I'd come to learn. Not by a long shot, because 3 weeks into the semester, she called me with excitement in her voice that I'd never heard before, and what she told me made everything that had happened so far feel like just the opening act of something much bigger, much darker, and potentially much more dangerous than either of us had anticipated. "Diana," she said, her words tumbling out fast, "I found something, in Christopher's files, something that changes everything we thought we knew. Can you come over? Tonight. This can't wait." And just like that, I was back in, heading toward that mansion in River Oaks with my heart pounding and my mind racing, wondering what secrets were still buried in the Ashford family vault, wondering how much deeper this rabbit hole actually went, wondering if the girl I was becoming, the one who craved this drama, this chaos, this chance to matter in someone's story, was really any better than the people I'd sworn I was nothing like. The drive back to River Oaks felt different this time, like I was choosing to walk into the fire instead of being rescued from the cold. Victoria's voice on the phone had this electric urgency that made my hands shake on the steering wheel of the used Toyota I'd bought with scholarship money, a world away from the luxury I'd briefly tasted. The gate code still worked, which surprised me until I realized Victoria probably kept it active on purpose, kept me tethered to whatever web she was still spinning. The house looked the same from outside, imposing, beautiful, completely unaware that its foundations were built on lies and bodies. Victoria met me at the door looking nothing like the composed socialite I'd first encountered in that graduation parking lot. Her hair was loose and messy, she wore yoga pants and an oversized sweater, and her eyes had this feverish brightness that immediately put me on edge. She pulled me inside and straight to Christopher's study, the room where I'd first overheard their argument months ago, the room that apparently still had secrets to spill. She'd spread documents across his massive desk, like evidence in a crime procedural, and gestured for me to look. "Read," she commanded, and I did. Bank statements, legal documents, emails printed and highlighted in yellow marker. It took me several minutes to piece together what I was seeing, and when I did, the floor seemed to tilt under my feet. Christopher hadn't just paid off Elena Torres to cover up what Sienna had done to Rebecca. He'd done it before, multiple times, to multiple families. There were at least 4 other incidents documented in these papers, going back years, involving everything from academic sabotage to physical assault to something that looked horrifyingly like sexual assault at a party. Each time, Christopher had deployed lawyers, money, and NDAs like weapons, making problems disappear before they could touch his daughter's perfect future. And each time, Victoria had known, had signed off on the payments, had chosen her daughter's reputation over other people's destroyed lives. I looked up at Victoria, trying to reconcile the woman who'd stood up at that memorial with the woman who'd enabled years of abuse, and she saw the question in my eyes before I could ask it. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice hoarse. "That I'm a hypocrite, that I only cared when it became convenient, when it was too late to matter. And you're right, I am. I was." She sank into Christopher's leather chair, suddenly looking every one of her 40-something years. "I told myself I was protecting my child, that these were mistakes, that she'd grow out of it. But seeing Rebecca's mother at that memorial, hearing about her daughter's potential, seeing what my protection had actually cost, it broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed something that had been broken for too long." She pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others, and slid it across the desk to me. "This one's different, though. This one, Christopher made sure I never saw." Inside were medical records, police reports that had been filed and then mysteriously withdrawn, photographs that made my stomach turn. A girl named Jessica Ramirez, 17, from a working-class family in East Houston. She'd been at a party at the Ashford house 2 years ago, one of those events where Sienna invited public school kids to show how inclusive she was, basically treating them like exotic pets. According to the police report that Christopher had buried, Jessica had accused someone at the party of assaulting her, had been found unconscious in one of the guest rooms, had woken up in a hospital with no clear memory of the night, and evidence that someone had hurt her badly. The investigation had pointed toward a group of boys from River Oaks Prep, but then suddenly all the evidence disappeared. Jessica's family received a substantial settlement, and the case evaporated like it had never happened. Except Victoria had found something in Christopher's safe that he'd kept for insurance or blackmail, or maybe just proof of his own power. A video from that night. Security footage he'd never turned over to police, showing Sienna and 3 of her friends dragging Jessica's unconscious body into that bedroom, laughing while they did it. Showing them leaving her there. Showing one of the boys going in after them. I felt vomit rise in my throat and had to swallow it down, had to grip the edge of the desk to keep standing. "Why are you showing me this?" I managed to ask. "Why now?" Victoria's face was stone, but tears tracked down her cheeks in silent confession. "Because I found out yesterday that Jessica Ramirez took her own life 6 months ago. Couldn't live with what happened to her, with knowing her attackers were walking around free, with the trauma that never went away. Her mother tried to sue, tried to reopen the investigation, but Christopher's lawyers crushed it. And I didn't know, Diana. I swear I didn't know about this one until I found these files 3 days ago." She stood up abruptly, paced to the window overlooking the pool where Sienna had probably laughed with friends while Jessica Ramirez suffered. "I've been trying to figure out what to do, how to make this right, but there is no making this right. That girl is dead. My daughter helped kill her, and my husband made sure no one would ever know. I destroyed my marriage and my social standing over Rebecca Torres, and it didn't change anything. The system is still broken. Rich kids are still getting away with murder. And I'm still complicit, because I didn't look hard enough, didn't question enough, let myself be comfortable while people died." I understood then why she'd called me, why she couldn't do this alone. Because what she was considering was so much bigger than the memorial, so much more dangerous than a public admission of enabling academic sabotage. This was evidence of serious crimes, of assault and conspiracy and obstruction of justice. This could send Christopher to prison. This could send Sienna to prison. This could burn down everything and everyone connected to the Ashford name, including Victoria herself. "What do you want to do?" I asked quietly, even though I already knew. Her eyes met mine, and they held the same desperate determination I'd seen in the parking lot, the same need to matter, to do something that couldn't be undone or ignored. "I've wanted to give everything to Jessica's mother. The files, the video, all of it. I want to help her get justice, real justice, criminal justice. I want to testify against my own husband and daughter if that's what it takes. And I want you there with me when I do it, because you're the only person in my life who understands why this matters more than family loyalty or self-preservation." She paused, then added softly, "And because you're the daughter I should have raised, Diana, the one who knows that some things are more important than comfort." I should have said no. I should have recognized that this was going to consume whatever was left of my normal college experience, that associating myself with something this explosive would define me forever, that I was being used again even if the cause was righteous. But I thought about Jessica Ramirez, about Rebecca Torres, about all the girls whose names we'd never know because people like Christopher Ashford were very good at making problems disappear. I thought about my own mother, about how she'd abandoned me without a second thought, about how I'd spent my whole life invisible to people who mattered until I became useful to Victoria's revenge. And I thought that maybe being useful for something good was better than being invisible, even if the usefulness came from someone else's guilt. "I'll help you," I said for the second time in our relationship, and Victoria actually smiled, this broken, relieved thing that made her look young and old simultaneously. We spent the rest of that night making copies of everything, organizing the evidence, crafting a strategy that wouldn't get us sued into oblivion or accidentally destroy the case with procedural mistakes. Victoria had learned from the memorial. This time we needed lawyers first, media second, everything documented and legally airtight before we made a move. She'd already contacted a criminal defense attorney who specialized in taking on powerful families, someone with a reputation for not backing down no matter how much money got thrown at them. The attorney's name was Patricia Reeves, and meeting her 2 days later in her downtown office, I immediately understood why Victoria had chosen her. She was maybe 50, black, impeccably dressed, and had eyes that could probably cut through concrete when she was cross-examining someone. She listened to our story without interrupting, reviewed the evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every trick wealthy families could pull, and finally leaned back in her chair with a low whistle. "This is big," she said bluntly. "This is national news. Criminal charges, civil suits, everything. Are you both absolutely certain you want to open this door? Because once it's open, there's no closing it. Your lives will never be the same." Victoria didn't hesitate. "I'm certain." Patricia looked at me, and I nodded, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "All right then," Patricia said, pulling out a legal pad. "Let's burn it all down." The next 3 weeks were a blur of legal preparation, coaching sessions with Patricia, coordinating with Jessica's mother, Elena Ramirez, who was understandably skeptical of the wealthy white woman who'd enabled her daughter's attackers, but willing to listen because justice mattered more than grudges. We had to time everything perfectly: criminal referral to the district attorney, civil suit filing, media strategy to prevent Christopher from controlling the narrative like he had with Rebecca. Patricia warned us repeatedly that this could fail, that Christopher's lawyers were the best money could buy, that wealthy defendants almost never face real consequences. But she also said that the video evidence was solid, that if the DA actually pursued charges, conviction was possible. The night before we went public, Victoria asked me to stay at the house. Her house now, since Christopher had moved to a hotel during their contentious divorce proceedings. We sat in the kitchen over coffee at midnight, and she looked at me with something like maternal concern. "You can still back out," she said. "I won't hold it against you, won't think less of you. You didn't create this mess, and you don't owe it your future." I considered her offer seriously for maybe the first time, really weighed what I was risking. My reputation, my privacy, my chance at a normal college experience where I was just another student instead of the girl involved in the Ashford scandal. But then I thought about what normal had gotten Jessica Ramirez and Rebecca Torres, how playing by the rules and trusting the system had ended with them dead while their attackers lived in mansions. "I'm in," I said firmly, "all the way." Victoria's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide this time. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "Don't deserve your loyalty or your help or your forgiveness." I reached across the table and took her hand, this woman who'd saved me and used me and taught me that courage and selfishness could live in the same heart. "None of us deserve anything," I told her. "We just get to choose what we do with what we're given. You're choosing to do the right thing now, even though it's hard. That counts for something." We filed everything the next morning. Criminal referral with the district attorney's office, including the video evidence, civil suits on behalf of Elena Ramirez against Christopher, Sienna, and the 3 boys who'd assaulted Jessica, and a press conference at Patricia's office with both Victoria and Elena present. The media response was instantaneous and enormous, even bigger than the Rebecca Torres revelation, because this involved actual violent crimes, video evidence, and a mother willing to testify against her own child. Christopher's statement came within hours, denying everything, claiming the video was manipulated, attacking Victoria's mental state and credibility. But this time, he couldn't just make it go away with money, because Patricia had made sure the evidence went straight to law enforcement before he knew it existed. Sienna's response came through her own lawyer, a statement claiming she'd been a minor at the time, that she'd been pressured by the boys, that she'd tried to help Jessica but had been too scared to speak up. It was a desperate play that nobody bought, especially when the video clearly showed her laughing. The three boys, all now in college, all from prominent Houston families, immediately lawyered up and refused to comment, and their families, predictably, closed ranks, issuing statements about presumption of innocence and malicious prosecution, and how dare anyone besmirch their sons' reputations. The public reaction split along predictable lines. People who'd been victimized by wealth and power supported us, shared their own stories, created hashtags and social media campaigns. People who benefited from the status quo attacked us, called Victoria a vindictive ex-wife, called me a social climber using tragedy for attention, called Elena a gold digger trying to cash in on her daughter's death. It was vicious and exhausting, and sometimes I'd read the comments and wonder if we'd made a terrible mistake, if putting ourselves through this public shredding would actually change anything or just satisfy our own need to feel righteous. But then the district attorney announced they were pursuing criminal charges against Christopher for obstruction of justice and conspiracy, against Sienna and the three boys for sexual assault, and suddenly it felt real in a way it hadn't before. Actual consequences, actual accountability, the kind of justice that money usually prevented but couldn't quite buy off this time because the evidence was too solid and the public attention too intense. The trial date was set for 6 months out, and Patricia warned us those would be the longest 6 months of our lives. She wasn't wrong. Christopher's legal team went scorched earth, filing motions to suppress evidence, attacking Victoria's character in court filings, hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on me and Elena and Patricia. They found out about my parents' abandonment and tried to paint me as someone with emotional problems and grudges against functional families. They discovered that Elena had briefly worked as a housekeeper for the Ashfords and tried to claim she'd stolen the documents herself. They filed ethics complaints against Patricia, claiming she'd coerced vulnerable clients. Every single day brought new attacks, new strategies, new attempts to discredit and exhaust us into giving up. Sienna tried to contact me directly twice, once through a fake Instagram account sending messages about how I'd destroyed her life for no reason, once showing up at my apartment building until building security removed her. Both times, Patricia instructed me not to engage, to document everything, to let the legal process play out. It was surreal watching someone I'd lived with, shared meals with, become this desperate stranger trying to manipulate her way out of consequences. And part of me, a small, uncomfortable part, actually felt sorry for her, wondered if she was capable of understanding what she'd done, or if her entire life of privilege had broken something in her capacity for empathy. Rebecca held up better than I expected, though the divorce proceedings were brutal, and Christopher made sure to drag her through every possible humiliation. He froze bank accounts, fought over property division, made her hire forensic accountants to prove which assets she had legal claim to. Their friends divided into camps, most siding with Christopher because that's where the money and power remained, leaving Rebecca increasingly isolated. But she threw herself into the Rebecca Torres Scholarship Fund, into supporting other families who'd been victimized by wealthy students, into building something meaningful from the wreckage of her marriage. She told me once that she slept better than she had in years, despite everything, because at least now she wasn't living a lie. My own life became strange and public in ways I'd never anticipated. I got interview requests from major news outlets, speaking invitations from organizations focused on justice reform, hate mail and death threats from people who thought I was destroying good families for attention. My university experience was completely consumed by the case. Professors and students treated me differently, some supportive, some hostile, all intensely interested in drama that had nothing to do with my actual education. I had to change my phone number 3 times, delete all social media, learn to check under my car for tracking devices, because Christopher's investigators were apparently that committed to finding something to use against us. Dating was impossible, friendships were complicated, and I spent most nights studying case law with Patricia instead of doing normal college things. But weirdly, I didn't really mind, because for the first time in my life, I mattered. I was part of something bigger than my own small survival, something that might actually change how the system worked, might make the next Jessica Ramirez believe that speaking up could lead to justice instead of just more trauma. Even when it was hard, even when I was exhausted and scared and second-guessing everything, I felt alive in a way I never had before. The trial, when it finally started, was everything Patricia had promised and worse. Christopher's defense team was relentless, attacking the chain of custody on the video, questioning Victoria's motives, bringing in expert witnesses to claim the footage had been edited. They painted Sienna as a troubled teenager who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to have her life ruined. The boys as young men who'd grown and changed and shouldn't be defined by one night. They portrayed Jessica as someone with pre-existing mental health issues, suggested her assault claims were exaggerated or fabricated, implied that her suicide was about other factors entirely. It was disgusting and effective, and there were moments during testimony when I genuinely worried they might win. But then Elena took the stand, and she was devastating. She talked about her daughter's dreams, her scholarship offers, the girl she'd been before that party. She described finding Jessica after she'd taken her own life, the note that said she couldn't live with what had been done to her, and knowing her attackers were unpunished. She looked directly at Sienna, at Christopher, at each of the boys, and asked them if their freedom was worth more than her daughter's life. The courtroom was silent, and I saw several jurors crying, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this was it. Victoria's testimony was powerful too, admitting her own complicity, explaining how she'd chosen denial over truth for too long, describing the moment she'd decided that protecting her daughter from consequences was actually the cruelest thing she could do. Christopher's lawyers tried to paint her as vindictive and unstable, but she stayed calm, stayed focused, never wavered from the central truth. Crimes had been committed, evidence had been destroyed, justice had been obstructed, and she was done being part of that system. When I was called to testify, my role was smaller, just confirming how Victoria had found the evidence, how we'd approached Elena and Patricia, establishing timeline and intent. But Christopher's lawyer tried to use me to attack Victoria's credibility, asking if she'd manipulated me, if I had ulterior motives, if I was being paid or promised anything. I looked at the jury and told them the truth. Victoria Ashford gave me a chance when I had nothing. She was probably using me at first, and maybe I was using her too. We both needed something the other had. But what we're doing now isn't about either of us. It's about making sure Jessica Ramirez's death meant something. Making sure the next girl who gets hurt by someone rich and powerful knows the system might actually work for her. That's all. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days of waiting and pacing and obsessively checking news updates and trying not to spiral into worst-case scenarios. Patricia kept telling us that long deliberation could mean anything: thorough consideration, disagreement among jurors, confusion about legal technicalities. We tried to stay busy, tried to maintain normal routines, but everything felt suspended in amber until that verdict came back. When the call finally came that the jury had reached a decision, we rushed to the courthouse through a media circus of cameras and reporters shouting questions. The courtroom was packed, everyone who'd followed this case wanting to see how it ended. I sat between Victoria and Elena, holding both their hands, feeling the weight of 2 dead girls and all the living people who'd been hurt by a system that valued wealth over justice. The verdicts came one by one. Christopher Ashford, guilty of obstruction of justice, guilty of conspiracy. Sienna Ashford, guilty of sexual assault, guilty of conspiracy. Each of the 3 boys, guilty on multiple counts. The courtroom erupted in noise, gasps, crying, shouts of approval and denial. Christopher's face went white, then red, rage and disbelief warring for dominance. Sienna collapsed in her chair, sobbing, looking young and broken and finally afraid. The boys' families were already preparing appeals before the judge even finished reading. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Christopher got 4 years in a federal facility. Not enough, never enough, but more than wealthy men usually got for white-collar crimes. Sienna got 3 years in a youth facility given she'd been 17 at the time of the assault, with probation and mandatory counseling after release. The boys got various sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years, all of them showing more emotion at their sentencing than they ever had during the trial. And the judge made a statement about how privilege was not immunity, how the law applied regardless of net worth, how she hoped this case sent a message that no family was above accountability. The civil trial was easier after the criminal convictions, harder to deny wrongdoing when you'd already been found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Elena was awarded substantial damages that would at least provide financial security, even if it couldn't bring her daughter back. Victoria donated her entire divorce settlement to the Rebecca Torres Scholarship Fund and various organizations supporting assault survivors, keeping only enough to live modestly. And me? I testified again, helped Patricia with victim impact statements, became the face of this case in a way I'd never intended, but somehow couldn't escape. When it was all finally over, when the media attention faded and the appeals process began its slow grind, and life started returning to something resembling normal, Victoria invited me to dinner. Not at the River Oaks mansion that had been sold to settle legal fees, but at a modest townhouse she'd bought in Montrose, decorated simply, comfortably, like someone learning to live without pretense. We cooked together. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, and sat at her small kitchen table that was nothing like the dining room where I'd first eaten with the Ashfords. "Do you regret it?" she asked me quietly. "Any of it? Because you gave up a lot for this, Diana. Your privacy, your normal college experience, your safety sometimes. And I brought you into it, used you for my own purposes initially. I need to know if I destroyed your life while trying to fix mine." I thought about it honestly, about the hate mail and the fear and the exhaustion, about the friendships I'd lost and the normal experiences I'd missed. But I also thought about Jessica and Rebecca, about their mothers getting to see justice even if it came too late, about the scholarship recipients who got opportunities they wouldn't have had, about the next girl who might speak up because she saw that sometimes the system actually worked. "I don't regret it," I said truthfully. "I hate parts of what happened, and I wish I'd understood the cost before I agreed. But I also know that I did something that mattered, that I helped break a system that needed breaking, that I stood with people who needed someone to stand with them. That's worth something. That's worth a lot, actually." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Seemed like that happened a lot these days, like she'd finally given herself permission to feel things she'd suppressed for years. "You're remarkable," she said softly, "and I'm sorry I didn't see that immediately. Sorry I saw you as a tool first and a person second. You deserved better from me." "We both did the best we could with what we knew at the time," I told her, "and we grew, we changed. That counts for something too." We finished dinner talking about lighter things, my classes, her new job with a nonprofit, plans for the scholarship fund, normal life stuff that felt revolutionary after months of legal drama. And when I left that night, hugging her goodbye at the door of her modest townhouse, I realized that somewhere in all this mess, we'd accidentally become family. Not the performative kind like the Ashfords had pretended to be, but the real kind built on honesty and shared purpose, and choosing each other even when it was hard. 6 months later, I got a call from my mother, the real one, the one who'd abandoned me after graduation. She'd been calling periodically ever since the first trial, leaving voicemails about how she was sorry, how she wanted to reconnect, how seeing me on the news had made her realize what she'd lost. I'd ignored every message, blocked multiple numbers, made it clear I had no interest in revisiting that relationship. But this call was different. She was crying, saying my father had been diagnosed with cancer, that they had no money for treatment, that I was their only hope because surely after everything that had happened, after all the attention and the lawsuit settlements, I must have money now. I listened to her entire pitch without interrupting, let her finish her desperate plea, and then I said very calmly, "You abandoned me when you thought I was worthless. You came back when you thought I might be valuable. That tells me everything I need to know about what I mean to you, which is nothing except as a resource to be used when convenient. I don't have money. Victoria donated hers and I'm still in school. But even if I did, I wouldn't give you a penny. Because the best revenge isn't hurting you back. It's building a life so good, so full of people who actually care about me, that you understand exactly what you walked away from and have to live with that knowledge forever. Goodbye." I hung up, blocked that number too, and felt something release in my chest that I'd been carrying since that graduation parking lot. The little girl who'd wanted her parents to love her, who'd thought their abandonment meant she was fundamentally unlovable, finally died, and in her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that family was what you built, not what you were born into, and that the best revenge was living well enough that the people who'd hurt you became irrelevant to your happiness. I graduated 2 years later with honors, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, with Victoria in the front row cheering louder than anyone, with Elena and her younger children there too, with Patricia attending because she'd become a mentor and friend. No one from my biological family came, and I genuinely didn't care. The family I'd chosen was more than enough. The Rebecca Torres Memorial Scholarship had supported 15 students by then, including 2 who were in my graduating class. Jessica Ramirez's story had led to policy changes at 3 Houston private schools, mandatory reporting requirements that might actually save lives. And I'd been accepted to law school, following Patricia's path, planning to become the kind of attorney who took on powerful families and didn't back down no matter how much money they threw around. At the graduation reception, a young woman approached me nervously, introduced herself as Sarah, said she'd been following my story for years. She told me she'd been assaulted by a wealthy classmate in high school, that her family had been pressured to stay quiet, that she'd been about to accept a settlement and an NDA when she saw what we'd done. Instead, she'd reported it, fought back, and got her attacker convicted. "You showed me that speaking up was possible," she said, crying, "that rich kids don't always win, that justice can happen if you're brave enough to demand it. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be." I hugged her, both of us crying now, and I thought about how revenge had transformed into something bigger than we'd ever intended. Victoria had wanted to punish Sienna, and I'd wanted to matter to someone. But what we'd actually done was create a blueprint for fighting back, for demanding accountability, for proving that the system could work if you pushed hard enough and didn't give up when it pushed back. That was better than revenge. That was legacy. Years later, I'm a lawyer now, specializing in cases where wealthy families tried to buy their way out of consequences. I've won some, lost others, but I never back down, never let them exhaust me into quitting. Victoria runs the scholarship fund full-time, has helped over 100 students access education they couldn't otherwise afford. Elena speaks at schools about her daughter, about the cost of privilege without accountability, about how justice delayed isn't always justice denied if you fight long enough. And me? I still think about that parking lot sometimes, about the girl eating a burger alone while everyone else celebrated with families who loved them. I think about how a stranger's knock on my car window changed the entire trajectory of my life, how being used for revenge accidentally taught me that I was worth something beyond my utility to others. Sienna got out of prison 2 years ago, moved to another state, lives quietly with a name change and a restraint order keeping her away from Houston. Christopher served his full sentence, emerged a broken man who lost his business, his reputation, his family. The boys scattered to different cities, trying to rebuild lives under the shadow of their convictions. They all got second chances, even if those chances looked nothing like the futures they'd expected. And maybe that's the real justice. Not that they suffered forever, but that they had to start over as normal people without the protective shield of wealth and power, had to experience the world the way their victims did, vulnerable and uncertain, and aware that actions have lasting consequences. I ran into Sienna once, entirely by accident, at a coffee shop in Austin when I was there for a case. She looked different, older, tired, without the polish and confidence that had defined her before. She saw me, froze, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the coffee shop. Then she walked over slowly, hands shaking, and said, "I know you probably hate me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I understand now what I did, what I took from those girls. I think about Jessica every day. I'll think about Rebecca every day for the rest of my life. I can't undo it, but I'm trying to live in a way that honors their memory, trying to be different than I was. I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, this broken version of the entitled princess who'd slapped me by that pool, and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not satisfaction, not even pity, really. Just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that she existed and had learned something terrible through experiencing consequences. "I hope you mean that," I said quietly. "I hope you become someone who makes the world better instead of worse. But your redemption isn't my responsibility, Sienna. I don't forgive you, and I don't hate you. You're just someone who did terrible things and is learning to live with that. Good luck with it." I left without ordering coffee, got back in my car, and drove away from that encounter feeling lighter somehow. Because the best revenge really wasn't her suffering. It was me being so completely free of her and everything she represented that running into her registered as nothing more significant than seeing a stranger. She'd been this huge presence in my life, this catalyst for transformation, and now she was just another person trying to be better than she'd been. That was her journey. Mine was already miles ahead. Now, sitting in my office with pictures of Victoria and Elena and Patricia on my desk, with case files stacked high representing families fighting back against privilege and power, with the life I built from ashes and anger and accidental courage spread out around me, I understand what that parking lot moment really meant. It wasn't about being saved. It was about discovering that I was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. The girl who ate alone after graduation doesn't exist anymore. In her place is a woman who chooses to show up for people who need someone to stand with them, who turns pain into purpose, who understands that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. Strong, successful, and completely unconcerned with their opinions. And that's how you win. Not by destroying your enemies, though sometimes they destroy themselves just fine. Not by becoming rich or famous or powerful, though those things can happen along the way. You win by building a life so authentic, so purposeful, so full of real relationships and meaningful work that the people who hurt you become footnotes in your story instead of the main plot. You win by transforming the anger that could have made you bitter into the fuel that makes you brilliant. You win by refusing to let your worst moments define you and choosing instead to let your best decisions shape your future. I still eat alone sometimes, by choice now rather than necessity, and when I do, I think about that girl in the parking lot, and I'm grateful to her for saying yes to Victoria's crazy offer, for taking that terrifying leap into someone else's revenge plot, for discovering along the way that she was capable of more than survival. She was capable of making a difference. We all are, if we're brave enough to try, smart enough to choose the right battles, and stubborn enough to keep fighting even when the system pushes back. That's not just revenge, that's revolution. And it starts with a knock on a window, a choice to answer, and the courage to become whoever you need to be to make the world just slightly more fair than you found it.